Alright, so in my last video I kind of trash talked 5th edition's challenge rating system and how bad or really just misleading it is for how to build really good combat encounters. And reasonably so, somebody in my comments, Venkelos9? I don't know if that's how you would pronounce that. Screen names are hard, but Venkelos9 suggested that, well, okay, Nick, what if you made a video on how to build good encounters, encounter design? And I was like, I mean, I don't know that I'm an expert, but I think that's a really good idea for a video. So here we are. Hey everybody, it's Nick, and so that is what we're going to be talking about today, is designing and building good combat encounters. Now I want to let you know that I'm not a 900-year-old war gamer who has extensive experience and practice in balanced, super strategic combats. That is not my goal or purpose. One of the main things I enjoy about a role-playing game is the ability to play a character and engage with other people and figure out what happens in the story, control your own narrative, things like that. So dynamic combats are not necessarily something I would consider myself an expert in, but I do have a lot of thoughts about what goes into a really good combat encounter, so let's get into it. First off, every combat is different, and it's important to try to figure out what is the purpose of this battle. You know, there's a very big difference between a random encounter with wolves while the players are making camp for the night and the final climactic boss battle of the entire campaign. Those are very different battles, and so when coming up with combat encounters, I want to think about what's the purpose of this battle. Is this patrol of bad guys before the players are approaching a lair? Is this a boss fight? Is this a lieutenant fight? Is this a fight with a really cool monster? Is this a fight where the players are trying to save somebody? You know, what's going on in the battle? You know, obviously a lot of fights are run in and make sure everything that has hit points on the other side of the door doesn't have hit points anymore. But I think there are more interesting or dynamic battle scenarios you can come up with. Rescue someone, stop the ritual, and all of these things have dynamic and interesting terrain elements. I think that's another huge part of combat, one that I'll cop to and say I'm terrible at. Coming up with interesting hazards and terrain. I think there's really good resources in 3rd and 4th edition for cool terrains and hazards that you can pull from if you can find those. But we get back to what's the purpose of this battle. And it's very important for us to set the terms of what this combat encounter is supposed to be about. What's going on in this combat is really important. And with that, we can answer our second most important question, which is how dangerous should this be? I think that is a very valid thing to ask as we're designing our combat encounters. Is not necessarily, okay, we want 2 of the players to go unconscious and 1 player to actually die and the other players to have used this many spell slots. And no, we don't need to be that specific, but it would be important and useful for us to know, okay, is this a combat that's supposed to be lethal and threaten the player's safety and health, or is this one that's supposed to drain their resources a little bit on the way through the dungeon? Those are different combat encounters, and it's important that we recognize that when we're designing them. And then we take those questions. We say, well, what is the purpose of this combat encounter, and how dangerous, how lethal should it be? And we try to figure out who is this? What is this? Is it a fight against undead? Is it a fight against, you know, these bandits or these giants? You know, all these different options for physically who's in the battle and what's going on. And then where I go from there is I start to use those questions with CR a little bit to sort of narrow the list down, give myself sort of parameters and a ballpark for cool monsters to find and use. And after that, I try to figure out what are each of these monsters? Is there a main monster, you know, for a boss fight, or even you know, a fight where there's a leader of something and then the followers, you know, the bandit captain and all of the bandits, you know, is there a main person? And then let's create some other villains, other enemies that do things that compensate for the main person's weaknesses. So if the main person is a kind of squishy ranged caster type, then I want to also put bad guys in that combat encounter that are big, brutish, hit point machines that can get up in the players' faces and melee them to protect them from protect the backline caster from the players themselves. Matt Colville has a great video on combat tactics and different types of monsters and like looking at skirmishers and artillery versus brutes versus things like that. And it's really interesting way to start to think about it. And I sort of use those tools a little bit to think, okay, who's in this battle? How do they complement each other to make it interesting and dynamic, combining with sort of terrain elements. You get that a lot with lair actions. A lot of times lair actions and even regional effects for big boss monsters will complement them in a way that helps out the boss monster, maybe shores up some of their weaknesses or gives them specific advantages to help them fight better. So after I've done all those things, then it's time to roll initiative. And this is where I think a lot of encounter design breaks down. And I want to encourage you with this reality. You don't have to stop balancing your encounter when initiative is rolled. I don't know where we as a community got this in our heads that, whenever you just decided 10 seconds before the battle was rolled that, actually there's going to be 5 orcs in here instead of 4 orcs. Well, now all of a sudden initiative is rolled and I can't touch anything. I can't keep monkeying with the monsters or have reinforcements come in or change the monster's hit points or whatever. That'd be cheating. It's ridiculous. You just came up with the fact that there's going to be this number of orcs in there off the top of your head. Why can't you just change damage dice that people have or hit points that they have to make the encounter a little bit weaker or stronger? Obviously, there is a limit to those things where all of a sudden now you're not really playing the game anymore. You're just kind of monkeying with numbers, and what's the point of the numbers anymore? But for a DM specifically, it's your job to make the game interesting and dynamic, so why would you think that your designing of encounters stops when initiative is rolled? So I'm here to remind you, give you permission, that you don't have to stop tweaking and tinkering with things as soon as initiative is rolled. But what I do want to sort of talk about a little bit is what types of things can and should you monkey with in the middle of a battle? And why should you in the first place? The only times I really mess with monsters in the middle of a battle is to make sure that a combat sort of falls within the parameters that I set up for how deadly or lethal or dramatic a fight is supposed to be. If I planned an encounter and I want it to be this big epic bad guy fight with this boss that they've been vying against for months in game and they're finally confronting him, and I realize based on how things are going and how poorly I put the encounter together that it was supposed to be this kind of really scary to pretty lethal battle, and actually it's going to be somewhere from very easy to, I guess, a little bit challenging, I will dynamically make the combat more difficult in the moment. I wouldn't go all the way to okay, well, now I'm just going to give him power word kill in an AoE because I can do that, which, by the way, I could, but that would be very unsportsmanlike. No, I just want to pull the average up a little bit. Maybe I go, oh shoot, I thought this would be enough hit points for a boss to have against this party, but actually there's a paladin and a rogue and a champion fighter who's critting all the time, and I'm going to slap another 100 hit points on here because he's not going to make it to round 2 if I don't. And I think that's perfectly valid. Obviously, there is a line to be walked with this. You don't want to always employ this. Sometimes it's really cool for the players and their awesome strategy with great rolling and great abilities to cruise through a combat encounter that you thought might be kind of dangerous. But also, when it's a big climactic bad guy, I want it to be cool and intense and epic. And winning in the first round is sometimes epic, but sometimes very anticlimactic. And I don't want that to be the case all the time. So I would only ever balance in the middle of a fight like that if I wanted to make sure that the fight was not falling where in the bounds I had wanted it to, and I needed to adjust it either harder or easier. And I go, oh shoot, if I use my abilities in this way, the whole party's gonna die. They can't win. I'm just gonna not use this NPC's 5th level spell here. Instead of Cone of Cold, I'm just gonna do like a lightning bolt, and it'll hurt, but it's not Cone of Cold. And that speaks a little bit to what kinds of things I do in the middle of combat to adjust stuff. Reinforcements is a great option for making a battle a little bit harder. The orcs in the other room come and join this fight. They hear what's going on, and you have them come in the middle of this fight. Maybe the big boss changes who they're targeting a little bit to target the big beefy tank who can take a few hits more, but they're still doing big damage. Or maybe they use some of their lower level spells to not threaten the party so much. Or maybe you put extra hit points on a creature. I often find that it is easier to bring a bad guy down in power than to bring a bad guy up in power, as opposed to taking this little kobold sorcerer and saying, oh shoot, man, the battle is not going very well. I'm going to give this guy fireball just to spice things up. Well, wouldn't he have used that in the first round? That doesn't make much sense. But the players don't notice as much when you as the DM are using weaker and weaker spells or resources or abilities, or maybe targeting people a little less than optimally. In my experience, it is better for you to have a slightly stronger enemy and make them a little bit weaker than it is to take a weaker enemy and try to make them stronger in the middle of a combat. So those are some of the big picture things. I wanted to get some of that out of the way first, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to build 3 combat encounters with those tools in mind. You know, picking what is this fight for, how lethal is it supposed to be, who is here and what are they doing, bad guys that complement each other, using CR as boundaries for that. In general, I think it's smart to avoid having one singular bad guy and it's just him. I also think Minions from 4th edition is a fantastic resource. They're basically the exact same in terms of stats, but they have 1 hit point and they take no damage if they succeed on an AoE saving throw. So if you hit them with a fireball and they succeed on their save, they don't die instantly. Obviously, you can tweak some of that a little bit if you would like, but I use Minions a lot. I never use a solo bad guy if ever I can avoid it, and if I want the battle to be a challenge. I also use a resource. There's a website, a blog from somebody called The Monsters Know What They're Doing, and I actually just bought his book. I should know what his name is. Hang on a second. Yeah, The Monsters Know What They're Doing by Keith Amman. It's a great book that I picked up recently, and he's got a good a blog, a website that has all this stuff in it. But basically, he breaks down based on the monster stat blocks. How might they function? How might they operate? What are good tactics? Who should you target and focus? And smart ways to play the monsters. It's a really interesting tool for dynamic monsters. I strongly recommend you check out that blog. I'm gonna leave a link to it down below so you can go and look it up. And also, you know, terrain and hazards and things like that should be part of cool dynamic combats. But what I want to do right now is I want to take 3 different combat encounters at different levels with different purposes and lethalities and things like that, and sort of talk you through my process. You know, I looked up some monsters already and came up with some ideas, but I want to sort of break down my thought process for how I might build an encounter. All right, so first we have at level 3, the players are all 3rd level. So, you know, already I'm trying to think about what are 3rd level characters like. They're pretty weak. They don't have a lot of hit points or cool abilities. They may have the ability to go like kind of Nova, but not tons of stuff. So it's important to keep all of that in mind. And this, I would like this to be, this is going to be kind of a lieutenant fight. You know, they have found a lieutenant of the bad guy that they're chasing, maybe in the first chapter of this adventure. You know, maybe there's like a young black dragon in a swamp, and they are trying to stop this young black dragon from terrorizing the local village. And there is a green hag who is loyal to you know, this dragon. And so I was going through, you know, looking at monsters and what do I want to be the central monster, and I picked a green hag, so now that's his lieutenant, and I go, okay, green hag, what might go well with the green hag? Because you don't want just one monster, even though a green hag is a CR 2 or 3, and I think technically per CR would be a fair fight for a group of 5 level 3 players. I'm just picking 5. You could have more, you could have less, but this is just, you know, the concept. I usually have between 4 and 7 players, usually about 5, so that's the number I'm going with. But anyways, 5 3rd level players, and I picked Green Hag to be the main boss, and then I was going through and go, okay, what else is gonna be, what might be with a hag? Ooh, there's a giant wolf spiders. That's cool thematically. This Green Hag has these wolf spiders that works with them and can be sort of harrying and in the player's face, and while the Green Hag is in the back casting spells. So you'll notice here that if you would like to, you can go and look up Kobold Fight Club and put in these monsters and see what the encounter balance would be here, but I don't really pay any attention to that. I mostly just get things in the right ballpark and say, okay, if they're going to be fighting, I usually try to pick a CR of a monster, especially this works at lower levels. It breaks down once you get past about 10, but at lower levels, I want the boss monster to be approximately the CR of the players, and then I also add in other monsters. And we'll see that in a little bit here as we go. But the Green Hag, I think it's CR2 or 3, something around there. These are all Monster Manual monsters that I'm using, by the way, so we're all on common ground. And I gave the Green Hag 2 giant wolf spiders, and if I would need to, the thing I would be most looking out for is how quickly would the wolf spiders go down in combat. And maybe I need to give them a few more hit points because they are like CR1 quarter, not really designed for third level players. Maybe they do too much damage, and so I would need to bring up the wolf spiders in health. But I would also try to use interesting terrain things. You know, the wolf spiders probably have webbing, and you're in a swamp, and so it's probably difficult terrain, but not for this hag or these spiders. They live here, and so the players physically getting around and getting in the face of the green hag should be part of the battle. It should be difficult for the players to get to the green hag and attack her. Maybe I would, I have no idea what green hags can do, but as I'm thinking about this battle, maybe I would make it so that a couple times she could reposition the battle a little bit and get herself out of trouble. Maybe I'll give her Misty Step or something so that she has the ability to reposition if she needs to, and make it even harder for the players to get to her. Or I could just not use that ability if the players are already having a really hard time of it. It all depends. So now our 5 players have leveled up to 7th level, and they are in a boss battle. They have been engaged with various skirmishes against this Yuan-Ti tribe for a long time, and they're finally engaging the leader of the Yuan-Ti tribe, the Yuan-Ti abomination, in its throne room, let's say, and it's got a few guards with it, you know, palace guards. Let's use Yuan-Ti Malisons. There's a couple different types of Malisons if we want to do that, or we could just have all one type. But basically this they would be able to be like ranged backline archers and stuff to be harrying the players, because the Yuan-Ti abomination is big and beefy and would be able to get in people's faces and do lots of damage. And so we want backline people to help harry the players, or even like get in behind them and attack them like rogues almost. That's a great tactic as well. But we're going through, we're asking ourselves, what's the purpose of this fight? Who's here? How lethal is it supposed to be? And that informs our decision about what monsters we are choosing. I believe if you put this into Cobalt Fight Club's encounter builder, it would say this fight is deadly, and maybe even a little more so than deadly. I don't care. In my experience, that is a pretty poor tool to figure out exactly how deadly a fight will be, and we want this fight to be actually deadly, so that's probably good. This is a boss fight. This is sort of the end of one of their arcs, and we want them to have a big climactic battle against this creature and its guards, and so we're going to have a really dangerous fight. A player might die. And what we could do, especially if the abomination is up in people's faces, and depending on your party composition, maybe we need to give it extra movement speed. Maybe we need to give it more hit points so that it can survive a little longer. That's my main go-to, is adjusting hit points, especially because hit points are already a range. You could already have a pretty significant range. I rarely go outside of that range, but I also, maybe it's a good idea. Maybe I should start with my monsters when I'm running. Basically give them their range of hit points instead of their actual hit points, and then as they get, you know, towards 0, it would let me know, okay, it would be reasonable for me to have them die at this point or at this point. That's an interesting tool that you can use to say, okay, it is reasonable for any monster that's like this to have between this and this hit points. Let's, you know, have some leeway with where that is. That is an option available to you, not one I'm saying you have to do. I have never done it. I literally just thought of it as I was talking to you right now. But I think it's kind of interesting. I might do that for certain boss fights going forward. And I often think about, like, Yuan-Ti are snakes, but like I think about them like desert snakes. I know a lot of people use them in jungles and stuff, but I think about them in deserts. And so what if, you know, there are kind of these hazards, and the players are fighting in this like desert throne room, but the ground is all sandy, and there's like ant lions, like gigantic ant lions in various pits, and so people are trying to get pushed into or avoid being pushed into, and maybe the ant lions don't do much damage, but maybe they grapple onto you and you can't get out and you have to struggle with these things. And so now you've got this dynamic environmental hazard that you're trying to escape from and navigate around or push people into, etc., as you are fighting against this boss. All right, and the final combat encounter, your players have leveled all the way up to 15, and they are traveling somewhere somewhere. This isn't a, hugely narrative adventure kind of thing. It's not, a boss fight or a lieutenant fight or anything. It's just kind of a travel encounter. You've been on the road for a little while, you want to spice things up, and maybe they find this creepy looking cave that they want to investigate before they spend a night's rest, or maybe it's the cave they try to investigate to spend a night there. And inside the cave you find this Death Knight doing a ritual, and we'll give the Death Knight a few lieutenants, let's say 2 or 3 wraiths, so that they have other options. These are undead. We want to look for undead of certain CRs and pair them together with other undead. It would be kind of weird if this Death Knight had like a bunch of Nothics with it, but I don't know, maybe that makes sense story-wise. That'd be kind of weird. What is a Death Knight doing with a bunch of Nothics? But for my example, we've got a few wraiths, and I would kind of use the Cobalt Fight Club encounter mounts just to get like a ballpark of how many wraiths. And I think the more important number is trying to get as close as you can to the number of players that there are. So we have 5 players, and in terms of actions, they would have an advantage as long as they have 4 or fewer enemies that they're facing, right? And so if we say that we're going to have a Death Knight and 3 wraiths, that's a pretty nasty fight. But also remember, it's a travel encounter. It's probably the only one the players are going to have today. It's not supposed to be lethal. It's supposed to be cool and exciting. And so we'll keep that in mind as we're balancing things, and maybe that would change how I run the Death Knight. Maybe I wouldn't have the Death Knight use its hurl orb of fire thing in a perfectly optimal way. Maybe I would have it target only one person as opposed to like the entire party, or open with it last, or never use it and just have the Death Knight sort of one-on-one attack people and things like that, as opposed to using big AoE abilities. That's an option I might employ to make this fight not super lethal. But then if I open up with, only doing one-on-one combat, it starts to look a little desperate, then I can bust out the big hurl flame thing if the players are sweeping through it a little too easily. So I sort of hold back one of my abilities just in case. So these are all kinds of options you can use to create interesting and dynamic combat encounters for like boss fights or guards or lieutenant fights. I just wanted to share with you some of my tools, some of the ways that I go about thinking about combats and how to build them. You've got your, how lethal is this supposed to be? What's the purpose of this fight? Who's here? What are other like monsters that are similar to that? What's interesting about the terrain or the dynamic of things like that? And then what tools can I use behind the scenes to make sure that this is going to be a balanced, I don't really care about balance in that kind of game sense, but make sure that the combat encounter is going to come out in such a way that it serves my narrative purposes for this combat. So those are some of my thoughts for how you can design interesting combats. Please feel free to comment some of your ideas. You'll notice that, again, this video was thanks to the suggestion of Vinkelos9, and if you have ideas for videos, the way that you share those with me is putting them in the comments, and who knows, next week I might do a video on a thing that you comment right now. So thank you all for watching here all the way to the end of the video, and I'll see you next time.